welcome back to another lesson. I've got an exciting one for you today. It's about economics, and that happens to have been my major in college. And I'm not sure if you remember how you chose your major, or if you choose it, don't do what I did. First thing is, I went to college for the wrong reasons. I was really just following a girl that I liked. And then I had no idea what I was going to study. So they had one day where you had to pick a major. You would go into the classroom and they would discuss the major. So I thought I was going into literature. I like to read. So I thought, okay, I'll major in lit. Got into the classroom. There was some head of the department there. They closed the door, and lo and behold, I looked up at the board and it said economics. And I had taken one economics course in high school, but I don't remember much at all. Interestingly enough, the first class in economics 101, it was microeconomics. And I still remember the professor's name, Alan Richards. That first day, in the first 10 minutes, I think I learned all the major important lessons that I still remember today. Just some very basic things and probably things you've heard before, like there's no such thing as a free lunch. So I've had to learn that one time and time again. When you think something is free, you will eventually pay for it. And I've got plenty of lessons. I'm not going to embarrass myself. Opportunity cost. Opportunity cost exists in every decision you make. For example, if you decide to buy a $50,000 hot car, and that was my professor's example back then, that's money that you could have invested today, and in 10 years' time would be worth most likely 3 times the price of that car. And in 10 years, you're probably not going to like that car anymore, and it's probably depreciated a heck of a lot since you drove it off that lot. In fact, immediately. Then there's the law of diminishing returns. I still remember Mr. Richards' face as he was describing this one. Diminishing returns. So yeah, his example was that first donut is really tasty. The second donut is tasty, but not as tasty as the first. Third donut doesn't taste so good. And by the fourth donut, you've made the decision that you're probably never going to eat donuts again. So those are diminishing returns. Law of supply and demand. Again, another solid economic lesson. The more demand there is for something, the higher the price the supplier can charge. And then the invisible hand. This is a more complex one, which I'll touch on the lesson for today. And so the invisible hand is always at work. The invisible hand is the free market. The invisible hand finds a balance between supply and demand. And here's a joke. How many Chicago school economists does it take to change a light bulb? Answer, none. If the light bulb needed changing, the market would have already done so. That's the invisible hand. And lastly, if you're an economics student ever, and the professor puts you on the spot, any question in economics can be answered with, it depends. All right. Which brings me to one of my favorite economists of all time. His name is Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman, in 1946, accepted a position in the economics department at the University of Chicago. And that would be his academic home for the next 30 years. Over the course of his career, Friedman became an articulate spokesman for free markets and free societies in an era when many social scientists disparage market solutions to social problems. Friedman believed economics was an engine of the discovery of the concrete truth. Friedman always insisted that the study of economics was not merely a mathematical game, and that it should enable one to understand how the real world works. Which brings me to the essay I'm going to discuss today. In 1993, he wrote an essay called Why Government is the Problem. Friedman discussed government systems that were no longer controlled by we the people. Instead of Lincoln's government of the people, by the people, and for the people, he believed that we now had a government of the people, by the bureaucrats, for the bureaucrats. He summarizes the problem by saying that government spends too much money on the wrong things And by doing so, it has resulted in becoming a self-generating monstrosity. So let's go through a couple of examples. Next to military spending, education is the largest socialist industry in the United States. The amount of money spent per pupil in the past 30 years, he said, has tripled in real terms after allowing for inflation. Although the input has tripled, he believed that the output was going down and public schools were deteriorating. Homelessness, the disgrace and scandal of the increase in homelessness, he felt was a direct result of government actions, such as rent controls. Furthermore, homelessness is also a result of governmental decisions to empty mental facilities and turn people out into the streets. Urban renewal, public housing programs, he continued, destroy far more housing units than they build. And they let many public housing units become breeding grounds for crime and lawlessness. The high cost of housing is also attributable to the proliferation all over the country of building regulations, zoning laws, and other governmental requirements, which raise the cost of housing drastically, and he showed by as much as almost 25%. So he goes on from medical care to the financial system. He points out all the problems that government creates by injecting itself into what should be free market-driven systems. Remember, the invisible hand will find the right balance. Further examples of government bureaucracy include the overregulation of industry, agricultural policies under which taxpayers say people should grow a certain crop, and that crop is eventually going to be destroyed or even given away. And think about pollution. Do we really need to tell companies they shouldn't pollute? Isn't it more profitable not to pollute? Let the free market decide, Friedman believed. Friedman explained further the government's role should be very limited. It should be limited to defend the nation against foreign enemies and to provide a means of deciding our rules and to adjudicate disputes. The biggest problem is that government actions often provide substantial benefits to very few while costing and imposing cost on many. He advocates for leaving the economy to private markets and capitalism. As an example, if a private enterprise fails, it loses money, it closes its doors. The owners, in order to keep the business open, have to dig into their own pockets. What happens when government programs are unsuccessful or unprofitable? Well, are there any that are profitable? So when a government enterprise fails, bureaucrats dig deeper into whose pockets? The taxpayers' pockets. So in summary, Friedman explains major social problems in our country have been produced by the well-intended actions of government. So then, to summarize and to his conclusion, why is it, for example, that the U.S. Post Office loses billions and is less efficient than the private United Parcel Service? One answer is that the incentive for profit is stronger than the incentive for public service. In one sense, he believed that was partially correct, but in another sense, he believed that was incredibly wrong because he thought people who run our private enterprises have the same incentive as the people who are involved in our government enterprises. In all cases, the incentive is the same, to promote their own self-interest. So therefore, another rule of economics, there is one thing you can trust everybody to do, and that is to put his interest above yours. The point is that self-interest is served by different actions in the private sphere than in the public sphere. Bottom line is different. An enterprise started by a group of people in the private sector may succeed or fail. They are reluctant to fail, however, so they have a strong incentive either to make the enterprise work or shut it down. You can only lose money for so long, right? However, in government, nobody, least of all politicians, like to admit that they've made a mistake. And they do not have to admit they've made a mistake. What do? They argue that the enterprise initially failed only because it was not pursued on a large enough scale. Does that sound familiar? More importantly, they have a much different and deeper pocket to draw on. With the best intentions in the world, they can try to persuade the people who hold the purse strings to finance the enterprise on a much larger scale, to dig deeper into the pockets of the taxpayers and keep the unprofitable enterprise going. That illustrates the general rule. If a private enterprise is a failure, it closes down. If a government enterprise fails, it is expanded. I hope you got a lot of value from that lesson today. Look up Milton Friedman, Why Government is the Problem. Thank you for joining me today. Join me again for another lesson.